This is part 2 of our lecture series on the first topic entitled Science and the Environment. In this video, we will briefly examine the current state of the planet and we will explore the terms sustainability and stewardship in the context of environmental science. In this first part of the lecture, we will take a brief look at four important global trends. First, the human population and well-being. Second, the status of vital ecosystem services. Third, global climate change. And fourth, the loss of biodiversity. This is just an overview since we will examine each of these trends in greater depth in our later lessons. This graph shows that the world population started a rapid growth phase in the early 1800s, driven by the Industrial Revolution, and it has increased sixfold in the past 200 years. In 2019, the world human population is 7.7 billion. In just the past 30 years, population has grown by 2 billion and it is expected to increase by another 2 billion in the next 30 years. Even though the growth rate is declining in the most recent years, the world population in 2050 is likely to exceed 9.7 billion, according to the Population Division of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. This complex graph shows the Human Development Index, or HDI, of more than 100 countries over a period of 40 years. The Human Development Index is a key part of the Human Development Report that is published by the United Nations Development Program every year since 1990. The Human Development Index is a comprehensive assessment of human well-being in different countries of the world. It is a summary measure of average achievement in key dimensions of human development, and these are a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. The HDI was created to emphasize that people and their capabilities should be the ultimate criteria for assessing the development of a country and not economic growth alone. Now back to the graph. Here, countries represented by lines with similar colors began with the same HDI values in 1970, and highlighted countries include the top and bottom performers, including other selected ones. Now, only 3 of the 135 countries that were analyzed declined in HDI, and most of the countries showed marked improvement. So during those 40 years, life expectancy rose from 59 years to 70 years. School enrollment climbed from 55% to 70%, and the per capita gross domestic product, or GDP, doubled to more than $10,000. So overall, it can be said that the human well-being has indeed improved markedly. However, as we are well aware of, this overall progress can and does mask serious inequalities. This map shows countries and territories by Human Development Index based on the 2018 data. So the higher the HDI of a country, the better the living condition of the people. And in this map, it is evident that there are huge gaps in human development across the world. In fact, economic growth has been extremely unequal, not just between countries, but even within countries. For example, in developing countries, an estimated 1.1 billion people still experience extreme poverty. More than 800 million people, and that's 13% of the people living in developing countries, remain undernourished, and some 6.9 million children per year do not live to see their fifth birthday. So the HDI can also be used to question national policy choices, asking how two countries with the same level of gross national income per capita can end up with different human development outcomes. And these contrasts can also stimulate debate about government policy priorities. Now, moving on. Ecosystem goods and services support human life and economies. Therefore, we have to protect ecosystem goods and services for future generations. To do this, we need to know what they are, how they are being used, and what is happening to them. To find out, scientists have carried out a number of large scale assessments. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is one of the large scale assessments and perhaps the most prominent compilation of available information on the state of ecosystems across the globe. During a period of 4 years, 1,360 scientists from 95 countries gathered, analyzed, and synthesized information from published and peer reviewed research. So the project focused especially on the linkages between ecosystem services and human well being on global, regional, and local scales. Ecosystem goods and services are grouped into provisioning services. These are goods such as food and fuel. Also, we have regulating services. So these are processes such as flood protection and cultural services. And these are those that are non material benefits such as recreation. There is also what we call the supporting services, such as primary productivity and habitat, which are necessary to the other three. In a summary report, the most prominent finding of the scientists was the widespread degradation and overexploitation of ecosystem resources. More than 60% of the classes of ecosystem goods and services that were assessed by the scientists were being degraded or used unsustainably. So, based on the large scale assessments, natural and managed ecosystems are in fact not being managed well. For one, human societies are depleting groundwater supplies around the world. So this graph shows the decline in water storage that is translated into a decrease in water levels measured in millimeters. In an article authored by J. Famiglietti and published in the Journal of Nature Climate Change, 2 billion people use aquifers as a primary drinking water source, and groundwater accounts for roughly one-third of the world's water withdrawals. The highest rates of groundwater depletion are in the world's largest food-growing regions. Therefore, food production is at risk if water supply and demand are not balanced because half of the water used for irrigation comes from underground. Another example is overfishing. This graph shows the global marine fish catch from 1950 to 2010, and over 90% of the world's assessed fisheries have met or exceeded their biological limits. That's according to FAO. And while the global reported catch has leveled out since the early 1990s, fishing effort has steadily increased since the 1970s, suggesting that stocks actually declined in most fisheries. The global fish catch, that is represented here by the purple line, has declined in recent years, even though fleets are spending more effort. That is represented here by the orange line. As we can see, the orange line is still rising, or it means that more effort is spent by the fleets to catch fish. In 2015, about 60% of the world's fish stocks were fished to a maximum, and about 35% of the fish stocks were overfished. Eventually, there will be very few fish stocks left, which could lead to the collapse of the fish industry, unemploying millions and destroying economies. Generally, in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, the scientists concluded that if this trend is not reversed, the next half century could see deadly consequences for humans as the ecosystem services that sustain life are further degraded. Some of these assessments also considered global patterns and others focused on regional ecosystems, but all found similar declining trends. Now, here's something to ponder upon. How does human well being continue to improve, as what is shown by the HDI, when natural ecosystems have been declining? Now, we will have an in depth discussion on global climate change in one of our future lessons, so I will just provide a brief overview here. This graph shows the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration that has been measured at the Mauna Loa Observatory since 1958. The atmospheric content of carbon dioxide has risen by 45% since the Industrial Revolution began around 1750. So for the past decade, the level of atmospheric carbon dioxide has increased by 2 ppm or parts per million every year. And this is primarily because the global economy runs on fossil fuel. This graph shows the temperature data from 4 international science institutions. All show rapid warming in the past few decades, and that the last decade has been the warmest on record. Now, thousands of scientific experts produced convincing evidences that increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide causes the rise in global temperature. So, they believe on human-induced global warming that is already severely affecting the global climate. The Earth is also confronted with yet another problem, and that is the loss of biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variability among living organisms, both terrestrial and aquatic. It includes the variety within species, among species, and within ecosystems. This infographic provides an overview of the species at risk of extinction. So 40% of amphibians could go extinct, along with 33% of marine mammals and 14% of birds. So the rapidly growing human population, with its increasing appetite for food, water, timber, fiber, and fuel, is accelerating the conversion of forests and other ecosystems to agriculture and urban development. So the inevitable result is the loss of many of the wild plants and animals that originally occupy those natural habitats. Pollution also degrades habitats, particularly aquatic and marine habitats, eliminating the species that they support. And in addition, hundreds of species of mammals, reptiles, amphibians, fish, birds, and butterflies, as well as innumerable plants, are exploited for their commercial purposes. Even when species are protected by law, many are still hunted and killed and marketed illegally. Now, why is the loss of biodiversity so critical? Well, many of the essential goods and services provided by natural systems are derived directly from various living organisms. And these goods and services are especially important in sustaining the poor in developing countries. So, biodiversity is also the mainstay of agricultural crops and of many medicines. It is also a key factor in maintaining the stability of natural systems and enabling them to recover after disturbances such as wildfires or volcanic eruptions. There are also aesthetic and moral arguments for maintaining biodiversity. So once a species is gone, it is gone forever. So finding ways to protect the planet's biodiversity is one of the major challenges of environmental science. We will cover loss of biodiversity in one of our future lessons. So this is just a sort of an overview. So let us move on to the next topic. Now, I believe you have already heard of this term. Sustainability is actually a broad concept that is used in different aspects of the world, from business to technology to environment and the social sciences. And there is no universally agreed definition of sustainability. In fact, there are many different viewpoints on this concept and on how it can be achieved. But in general, sustainability can be defined as the ability of the Earth's various natural systems and human cultural systems and economies to survive and adapt to changing environmental conditions indefinitely. It therefore implies the responsible interaction with the environment to avoid depletion or degradation of natural resources for long-term environmental quality. The practice of sustainability helps to ensure that the needs of today's population are met without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now let's talk about stewardship. Literally, stewardship is the job of supervising or taking care of something, such as an organization or a property. When taken into the environmental context, it refers to the actions and programs that manage natural resources and human well-being for the common good. Stewardship is actually a concept that can be traced back to ancient civilizations. A steward was put in charge of his master's household, responsible for maintaining the welfare of the people and the property of the owner. Because a steward did not own the property himself, the steward was responsible for caring for something on behalf of someone else. So that is the concept, the idea. Applying this to the world today, stewards are those who care for something that they do not own and that they will pass on to the next generation. Now, stewardship is compatible with the goal of sustainability, but it is different from it because stewardship deals more directly with how sustainability is to be achieved. So it refers to what actions are to be taken and what values and ethical considerations are behind those actions. Now, because a steward is someone who cares for the natural world on behalf of others, we might ask this question: to whom is the steward responsible? Many would probably answer that the steward is responsible to present and future generations of people who depend on the natural world as their life support system. Now, while you may have a different answer, our responses to that question depends primarily on our stewardship ethics. Stewardship ethics is concerned with right and wrong as they apply to actions that are taken to care for the natural world and the people in it. It recognizes that even our ownership of land is temporary. The land will be there after we die, and others will own it in turn. So there are several underlying reasons for stewardship ethics, some stronger than others. For people with religious convictions, stewardship stems from a belief that they are stewards on behalf of a higher power. For others, stewardship becomes a matter of concern that stems from a deep understanding and love of the natural world and the necessary limitations in our use of that world. But most of our ethics concerning natural things deals with how those things serve human purposes. That is, our current ethics is highly anthropocentric. For example, a basic ethical principle from the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the Environment states that all persons have the right to a secure, healthy, and ecologically sound environment. So here, the point of the healthy environment is for humanity. So these three, the one that I have discussed in the first part and the two that I have discussed in this lecture, are the unifying themes in our succeeding topics in this subject. So we have sustainability, stewardship, and sound science. Sustainability, as shown here, includes the actions that we take to protect ecosystems and their services. The stewardship is shown here by these people who care for the place that they are in. And the sound science is demonstrated here by these polar studies that is critical to understanding the effects of human activities and making good policy.